Nuclear-powered missile submarines became a key part of Western and Soviet deterrence.
For decades, the dark, freezing waters of the ocean have hidden the Soviet Union's most dangerous secrets. We're talking about dozens of nuclear submarine wrecks, silent tombs of steel and radiation. Most people figured they were just old problems, rusting away harmlessly. But here's the catch. Scientists just sent robots to investigate these wrecks, and the video they recorded from the deep isn't just scary. The data they captured, the things they measured, proved that a catastrophe isn't just possible. It may have already started. What they found is changing everything we thought we knew about these underwater time bombs. What the drones saw. The story starts in the Norwegian Sea. The date was April 7, 1989. The crown jewel of the Soviet Northern Fleet, the K278 Komsomolets, was in trouble. This wasn't just any submarine. It was a one-of-a-kind boat, a deep-diving monster with a hull made entirely of titanium. It could dive deeper than any American sub over 3,300 feet down. It was a true marvel of engineering. It was the only one of its class, a prototype, a ghost. But on that day, a fire broke out in the rear of the sub. It was sudden. It was fast. The official story is that an electrical short in the 7th compartment sparked the blaze. But here's the deal. Not everyone buys that story. You see, the Komsomolets was on a record-setting mission. It was pushing the limits, diving deeper and running faster than any boat before, and this is where the wild theories start. One theory: the fire wasn't an accident. Some experts whisper that the sub was testing a new, highly experimental weapon, maybe a torpedo with a bizarre new fuel. Something unstable, a fuel that ignited. Others believe the sub didn't just catch fire, it was attacked. They point to the fact that this was the height of the Cold War. A top-secret titanium sub all alone in the deep? It was the perfect target. The theory goes that a US or British Hunter sub was trailing it, got too close, and the two machines collided in the dark. The impact sparked the fire that doomed the Komsomolets. Whatever the cause, the result was a nightmare. Electrical systems failed. The ballast tanks wouldn't work. The crew fought the fire for 6 hours in brutal, icy conditions. They surfaced, but the fire was too intense. The sub, a symbol of Soviet power, slipped beneath the waves and plunged more than a mile, almost 5,500 feet, to the ocean floor. Of the 69 men on board, only 27 survived. It was a tragedy. And for 30 years, that's what it was, a sad story, a memorial. But here's the deal. The Komsomolets wasn't just a sub, it was a nuclear weapon. Down in that wreck, sitting in the dark, is a 190 megawatt nuclear reactor. And that's not even the worst part. The crazy part is, it's also carrying 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes. These torpedoes aren't like the ones in the movies. They don't have uranium. They have something far, far worse. Plutonium. Each one is packed with about 28 pounds of it. Plutonium is one of the most toxic substances known to man. A single speck of it, if inhaled, is enough to be lethal. And now there are pounds of it sitting on the seafloor. For years, scientists said it's fine. The water is too deep, too cold. The plutonium is stable. It won't go anywhere. But not everyone was convinced. The Norwegians, whose coastline is right there, were worried. So in 1929, a joint Norwegian-Russian mission did something new. They sent a state-of-the-art remote-controlled robot, an ROV, down to the wreck. They were going to record what was really going on. The first footage was haunting. The titanium hull, which was supposed to be rust-proof, was covered in corrosion. But then the ROV got close to a ventilation pipe, a small opening in the side of the sub, and what they saw made their blood run cold. A strange, cloudy plume was puffing out of the pipe like smoke from a chimney. The robot's sensors went wild. This is the recording that changes everything. They weren't just seeing it, they were measuring it. They took samples. And when they got those samples back to the lab, the numbers were unbelievable. The radiation levels inside that plume were up to 1 million times higher than the normal seawater. Let that sink in. Not double. Not 100 times, 1 million. The main culprit? a nasty element called cesium-137. This is the same stuff that poisoned the ground around Chernobyl. It gets into the water, it gets into the plankton. The plankton are eaten by small fish, the small fish are eaten by big fish, and the big fish, well, they end up on dinner plates. What most people don't realize is that this discovery is a game changer. It proves the wreck is not stable. The plutonium in the torpedoes is breaking down. The salt water is eating away at the sub, and the poison is getting out. The puffs of radiation were happening because of the ocean currents, washing the poison out of the wreck in pulses. And this leads to another wild theory. Some people whisper about a mythical Cold War substance called red mercury. It was supposedly a secret material used in triggers for nuclear bombs. Many experts say it was a hoax, a fake story to trick spies. But others aren't so sure. What if the Komsomolets torpedoes had a new experimental trigger? What if red mercury was real and it's this unknown material that's reacting with the salt water in such a violent, unexpected way? It would explain why the leak is so potent. So here's the deal. The Komsomolets is a ticking time bomb. The scientists on the mission were stunned. They said they had never seen levels this high coming from a wreck. It proves the out-of-sight, out-of-mind approach is a total failure. The wreck is a generator of radioactive pollution, and it's been silently pumping it into one of the world's most important fishing grounds for years. And that's putting it lightly. The question was no longer if it would leak, but how fast. But the most terrifying part, the Komsomolets isn't alone. Why they dumped the fuel. The Komsomolets is a disaster, but it was an accident. The sub was lost in a heroic fight. But what about the other wrecks, the ones that weren't accidents? You see, what they recorded from the Komsomolets was a wake-up call. It made scientists look again at all the other pieces of Soviet nuclear junk littering the Arctic. And what they found was, in some ways, even worse. Welcome to the Barents and Kara Seas. This is the frigid backyard of the Soviet and now Russian Northern Fleet. And during the Cold War, they treated it like a garbage dump, a nuclear garbage dump. According to official reports, the Soviets intentionally scuttled or sank 19 ships loaded with radioactive waste. But that's not all. They also dumped 17,000 containers of radioactive waste and, get this, 16 nuclear reactors. 16. Many of them still full of spent nuclear fuel. They just dropped them in the ocean. The most famous of these isn't a submarine, but it is from one. It's the reactor from the K-27. This was an early experimental sub. Its reactor was a total failure. It was cooled by liquid metal, not water, and it was constantly breaking down. In 1968, it had a terrible accident that leaked radiation and sickened the crew. The Soviets tried to fix it for 10 years, but couldn't. So in 1982, what did they do? They just towed the whole submarine out to the Kara Sea to a spot that was only 100 feet deep and sank it on purpose, with its 800 pounds of highly enriched uranium fuel still inside. But why? The official story is it was too expensive and dangerous to dismantle, but the wild theory is much darker. That liquid metal reactor, it wasn't just a failure, it was a monster. It was so unstable, so unpredictable that the crew had nicknamed it the Golden Fish, a sarcastic name for something that would bring them ruin. The theory goes that the Soviets realized they hadn't just built a bad reactor, they had built a bomb. A system so volatile that any attempt to dismantle it on land could trigger a Chajma Bay-style explosion. But worse, sinking it in the shallow, isolated Kara Sea was the only way they could be sure to bury their mistake, hiding it from their own people and from the West. For decades, this too was out of sight, out of mind. But the new data from Komsomolets made everyone panic about the K-27. If the Komsomolets is leaking in deep water, what's happening to the K-27 in shallow water where storms can hit it? Scientists believe the reactor is a ticking time bomb. They say a nuclear chain reaction could start up again underwater, triggering a massive explosion of steam and radiation. It would be a true underwater Chernobyl. But the story of this Arctic graveyard gets even darker. Fast forward to 2003. The Cold War is long over. Russia is trying to clean up its act, partly with American money. They have a whole fleet of old, rusting, dangerous subs from the 1960s. One of them is the K-159. It's been retired for 14 years, just rusting at a dock. Its reactors are shut down, but they are still full of spent nuclear fuel, about 800 kilograms of it. That's nearly a ton of the most dangerous stuff on Earth. The plan was to tow the K-159 to a shipyard to be dismantled. But in a move that still baffles experts, they decided to tow this leaky 70-year-old hulk across the Barents Sea in the middle of a storm. And they towed it using old pontoons that were barely floating. It was a recipe for disaster. The storm hit. The pontoons broke loose. The K-159 started taking on water. In the middle of the night, the submarine, with its crew of 10 men who were sent along for the ride in its ton of nuclear fuel, sank. It went down in over 800 feet of water. 9 of the men perished. This seems like a story of pure criminal neglect, and it is. But there's a wilder theory, a more cynical one. What if the sinking wasn't an accident? Think about it. Russia was being paid by international partners to dismantle these old subs. But what if the cost of actually dismantling the K-159 was more than the money they were getting? What if the sub was so leaky, so irradiated that the shipbreakers refused to touch it? The theory is that the sinking was an intentional accident, a convenient way to make a billion-dollar problem disappear. They get to keep the cleanup money, and the submarine is now at the bottom of the ocean where it's too expensive to recover. It's a dark, cold, and terrible idea, but it would explain how such a stupid plan, towing a wreck in a storm, was ever approved. So here's the deal. The recordings from the Arctic aren't just from one sub, they are a whole library of disasters. You have the Komsomolets actively leaking plutonium. You have the K-27 intentionally sunk and threatening to go critical. And you have the K-159, a toxic wreck created by pure modern-day neglect. Or perhaps by a dark financial plot. What most people don't realize is that these 3 wrecks alone contain more long-lived radioactivity than all the radioactive waste ever dumped in the ocean by all other countries combined. And that's just the Arctic. The problem on the other side of the world in the Pacific is on a whole different scale. It's not that simple, though. The threat in the Pacific isn't deep, it's wide, where hundreds of subs go to rust. If the Arctic is home to a few very dangerous wrecks, the Pacific is home to a fleet of them. We're talking about Vladivostok, Russia's main port on the Pacific Ocean. On the quiet coastlines near this city, the water looks ordinary. But just below the surface lies something that was never meant to linger this long. Locals call it the Submarine Cemetery. This isn't a single wreck. This is a mothball line, a place where the Soviet Union sent its old, decommissioned submarines to wait for their turn to be scrapped. But here's the catch. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and the money for scrapping these subs, it just vanished. So for more than 30 years, this ghost fleet has been sitting there. We're talking about dozens of hulks. Some reports say over 100 submarines were left here. They are clustered in shallow bays, tied to old piers, or just half sunk in the mud. Satellite images and recordings from daring local explorers show a truly post-apocalyptic scene. You see rusted-out hulls, conning towers sticking out of the water at strange angles, and decks covered in weeds. What most people don't realize is that these aren't empty, harmless tubes of steel. Many of these submarines were nuclear-powered, and the decommissioning process was a total mess. The challenge is huge. Decommissioning a nuclear sub means safely defueling the reactor. This is a complex, dangerous, and expensive job. You have to handle the radioactive fuel rods, put them in safe containers, and store them.
But in the chaos of the 1990s, this process just stopped.
So many of these wrecks, rusting away in shallow water, still have their nuclear reactors inside. Some may even still contain spent nuclear fuel. They are just sitting there, corroding in the salt water right next to a city of over 600,000 people, and this is where the mystery deepens. The recordings here are not just satellite photos, they are whispers of a new threat. A wild theory is floating around. What if these subs aren't just being ignored? What if they're being scavenged? Think about it, an unguarded graveyard of nuclear technology. The theory is that rogue states or even terror groups are using this ghost fleet as a parts shop. Sending in small, secret dive teams in the dead of night, they wouldn't be stealing the whole reactor. But what about the components? The special pumps, the shielding, the control systems? Or worse, what if they are practicing? Learning how to take apart a nuclear reactor using these wrecks as their training ground before they go after a live one. It's a terrifying thought. These wrecks aren't just a toxic dump, they're a potential university for nuclear terrorists. And get this, the danger is not theoretical. This exact area has a history. In August 1985, at a shipyard in Chazma Bay, right near Vladivostok, a routine refueling operation went horribly wrong. They were working on a nuclear submarine. Technicians made a mistake. A chain of failures led to a sudden, uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction inside the reactor. The result was a massive thermal explosion. The blast was so powerful it blew the 20-ton reactor lid straight up into the air. A column of radioactive material shot thousands of feet into the sky. The explosion instantly ended the lives of 10 sailors. Dozens more were severely injured. A fire raged for hours, spreading more contamination. A radioactive plume drifted over the land and water. The shipyard, the docks, and the surrounding hills were all poisoned. For years, the Soviets kept it a secret. It was one of the worst nuclear accidents in naval history, a small Chernobyl that most of the world never heard about. The official story was a violation of safety procedures. But the wild theory? It wasn't just an accident, it was an experiment. The theory goes that the reactor on that sub was being intentionally stress tested. The engineers were pushing it on purpose to see how much power they could squeeze out of it, to see what the breaking point was. They were treating a live nuclear reactor like a race car engine, and it blew up in their faces. The 10 men who perished weren't just victims of an accident, they were victims of a reckless, secret experiment. So, here's the deal. The submarine cemetery of Vladivostok is sitting right on top of a known contamination zone. The recordings here are from the sailors who survived Chazma Bay, from the locals who whisper about the ghost fleet, and from the satellite photos that prove the wrecks are still there. The problem is, the backlog Russia simply inherited too many submarines and had no money to clean them up. International partners, including the United States and Japan, have poured millions of dollars into helping Russia dismantle its old fleet, and progress has been made. But the hulks that remain are the hardest, most dangerous, and most expensive to deal with. Every year, the saltwater eats away more of their hulls. Every year, the chance of a reactor compartment collapsing or a containment structure failing gets higher. The threat isn't a deep-sea plume like with the Komsomolets. The threat is a slow, steady leak of poison into a busy, heavily fished harbor. And all of this was about the environment. But there was one Soviet submarine wreck where the recordings had nothing to do with radiation and everything to do with espionage. Howard Hughes's Deep Sea Lie. This story is different. It's not about radiation leaking out, it's about spies trying to get in. The recording in this chapter isn't data, it's the actual video, film, and secrets the CIA pulled from a Soviet wreck. And it's one of the wildest, most expensive secret operations in history. The year was 1968. The Cold War was at its peak. A Soviet Golf II class submarine, the K278, was on patrol in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This sub was carrying 3 nuclear-armed ballistic missiles. And then, one day, it just vanished. It stopped checking in. The Soviets searched for it, but the Pacific is a big place. They couldn't find it. It was gone. But here's the catch. The Americans found it. The U.S. Navy had a network of underwater listening posts. They heard a strange sound, an implosion, and they figured out roughly where the sub went down. They sent one of their own subs, the USS Halibut, to find it. And it did. The K278 was sitting on the ocean floor 3 miles down. That's 16,000 feet. So here's the deal. A Soviet nuclear sub, complete with missiles, code books, and encryption machines, was sitting on the seabed. It was an intelligence goldmine. The problem? It was 3 miles down. You can't just send a diver. No machine on Earth could lift something that heavy from that depth. So the CIA did what the CIA does. They built one. They launched Project Azorian, and they needed a cover story, a big one. So they went to the most famous and weirdest billionaire in the world, Howard Hughes. The story was that Hughes was going to mine the ocean floor for manganese nodules. It was a crazy, futuristic idea. they built a massive 600-foot ship called the Hughes Glomar Explorer. It had a giant moon pool in the middle and a massive skyscraper-sized claw designed to be lowered to the ocean floor. The press and the Soviets bought it. Everyone thought Hughes was just being eccentric again. But the Glomar Explorer wasn't for mining. It was a high-tech recovery vessel. In 1974, 6 years after the sub sank, the ship sailed to the wreck site. They lowered the giant claw, a thing they called Clementine, down for 3 miles. They found the wreck. They locked onto the sub, and they started to lift. What most people don't realize is it almost worked. The official story is that they got the sub halfway up, but then the old damaged hull couldn't take the stress. The claw failed. About 2/3 of the submarine broke off and fell back to the ocean floor, but the CIA did get a 40-foot section of the bow. And what was inside? This is where the recordings come in. The CIA filmed everything. They recovered the bodies of 6 Soviet sailors whom they later buried at sea with full military honors, a video they later gave to the Russians. But they also got their hands on 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes. They got sonar equipment. They got technical manuals. The one thing they didn't get was the prize, the missiles and the code room, which were in the section that broke off. That's the official story. Now for the wild theories. Theory number 1, the It Broke Apart story is a lie. It's the second cover story. The real story, the theory goes, is that the Glomar recovered the entire submarine, or at least the entire section they wanted, the part with the missiles and the code room. What did they find? Something so big, so secret that they had to pretend the mission was a failure. What could be that big? Maybe proof the sub's missiles were aimed at China, not the US. Or maybe they found something that wasn't Soviet. Theory number 2. This one is a mind bender. What if the K278 wasn't on a normal patrol? What if it was a rogue sub? Some researchers have pieced together a wild story. The sub was secretly taken over by a rogue faction of the KGB. Their plan? To sail to Hawaii and launch a nuclear missile at Pearl Harbor. They wanted to start World War III and frame China for it. The sub sank before they could do it. If this is true, what the CIA really recovered wasn't just a sub, it was proof of a plot that almost ended the world. Theory number 3. This is the darkest one. The K278 didn't sink because of an accident. It was sunk. By who? An American submarine. The theory points to the USS Swordfish. The story goes that the Swordfish was shadowing the Soviet sub. There was an accident, a collision, or maybe even a deliberate torpedo launch. The K278 was destroyed. Project Azorian in this theory wasn't an intelligence mission. It was a cover-up. The CIA had to get to the wreck 3 miles down to recover their own torpedo to get their technology back before the Soviets found it. The crazy part is, the story got leaked. In 1975, a reporter broke the story of the Glomar Explorer. The CIA was furious. They even tried to stop the news from being published. When other reporters called the CIA for confirmation, the only thing the CIA would say was, "We can neither confirm nor deny." And that phrase, the Glomar response, is still used by intelligence agencies today. So while the world is worried about what's leaking out of Soviet wrecks, the CIA was worried about what they could pull out. This story proves that these wrecks aren't just environmental hazards, they are time capsules of technology, secrets and lost lives resting in the deep. But the secrets of the K278 are history. The secrets of the Komsomolets, they're the future. Can the bombs be stopped? So you have environmental time bombs like the Komsomolets and K159, you have the rusting Ghost Fleet in Vladivostok, and you have the spy thriller wreck of the K129. What does it all mean? This is the down-to-earth part. The recordings from these wrecks, the radiation data, the sonar maps, the CIA's secret videos, they all point to one urgent conclusion. The ocean is not a magic carpet. You can't just sweep your most dangerous mistakes under it. Let's go back to the Komsomolets. The wow factor isn't just the 1 million times radiation level. The real shock is what it means for the food chain that cesium-137, it mimics potassium. That means living things, from plankton to whales, absorb it. It builds up in their muscles. So that plume of radiation from the wreck, it's being eaten. Norwegian scientists have been recording the fish in this area for years. And yup, they are finding cesium-137 in fish and crabs. Right now, the levels are low. They say it's safe to eat. But here's the catch: the Komsomolets is corroding. The leaks are getting worse, not better. The plutonium in those torpedoes has a half-life of 24,000 years. It's not going away. So here's the deal. We are at the start of this problem, not the end. The recordings from 19 prove the containment is failing. Now scientists are in a race against time. They are trying to figure out what's next. There are plans, crazy science fiction plans. One plan is to lift the K278, the one that sank in 2003. This would be a massive billion-dollar operation, and as we said, it could break the sub apart. For the Komsomolets, it's too deep to lift. So the plan is to entomb it. They are talking about building a custom sarcophagus like the one at Chernobyl and lowering it a mile down to cover the wreck. Or they might try to fill the wreck with a special gel or concrete to seal the leaks. But all of this costs billions of dollars. So what do you think? Are these wrecks just tragic history, or are they an active threat, part of a darker game? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories they don't want you to know.